All right, how's it going, everybody? I wanted to do another video right quick. Hopefully, it's not very long. But this is going to be first of all, my name is Mark. Thank you for watching the channel. And if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Please write some comments. Give me a thumbs up. Hit the bell for more notifications. Y'all know the routine. I want to do something really quick. And the reason why I want to say this is because this is the classic argument you see a lot of this on YouTube, and some people's channels are better explaining this than others. So I just want to throw my 2 cents on the take as well, since I had an opportunity to work with both, and I work with both. And that's going to be the title of my video: hardware versus plugins. There are pros and cons to both. The thing is, you just have to weigh which pros and cons fit your needs. Some people have a very minimum small setup, so the plugins are probably going to be more to fit that small setup because they're easier. But let's face it, the number one attraction with plugins, the number one pro is price. The price of plugins give you access to some of the most sought after gear that most of us, 90 plus of us, can't afford. And most of these commercial studios were on loan and had big loans and trying to make back all the payments of all the gear that they have acquired with all these, plugins. Now, the con to plugins is, one of the biggest cons to plugins would be they're only as good as your operating system, the DAW, and your computer. If you're running, for example, if you had a whole bunch of 32-bit plugins, and now you got Windows 10 or even Windows 11 now, 90% of the time those 32-bit plugins are probably not going to work, especially when you have older gear. I have an M-Audio interface. It's an old one, and it's not going to work anymore. The drivers are not even, you can't even download the drivers. So that's the downside to even plugins. It's a really nice audio interface. It worked well. It's dated. I had to upgrade, but it's a nice looking audio interface. It's just that you can't use it now. It's not usable because Windows won't even recognize it. Yet alone they even try to get to work on a Mac. And it's besides the converters on it are outdated anyway. So I hate to throw it away, but I don't know what to do with it. It's not usable. Some people are like, well, why don't you just, some people might give it to me. If I can't get it to work on a newer computer, you're not going to be able to get it to work either. So it's just like, man, I don't know. So the plugins are always being updated. And the problem with the con to plugins is that with a lot of times you have to upgrade your subscription to that plugin company. I don't care if it's Waves, Plugin Alliance, Brainworks, Sound Toys, whatever. The only great thing if you have a subscription to Slate is they're always, if you got they're all in Access Pass and all that, you always have access to all their plugins. You may be paying the $14.99 a month, which I do, but it allows you to all their plugins, period. Or the great thing is about plugins is they're usable everywhere. It's only based on your computer. Now, hardware. What I love about hardware is I can physically touch my mixing console. I'm not mousing my with my mouse. Yeah, I got a fader port, but it's only limited to one channel unless I have a fader port with 8 channels, or even a fader port with 16 or even 24, whatever. But let's face it. Even when you start buying external gear, the stuff can get expensive. Even spending $500-600 even on a DAW controller, that gets pricey when you start adding more stuff. And let's face it, even plugins, especially UAD plugins, they're expensive. At some point you're like, well, I might as well just get some hardware units. But I like the fact that I can touch my console. I can move faders. I can do this. You can't do this with in your actual real mixer in your DAW. You can't do this. You can't physically put your hand and turn EQ knobs and run bus faders and the master bus, and you can't do that. You can't do this. Then in my rack, I got some compressors here. I can turn physical knobs. I can actually turn the knob and feel exactly where I want to put it. And I can actually see the meters going. And that way I can actually see the meters, everything working all in real time without, in your DAW, a lot of times when you open the plugin, the only time you can see the plugin working is when you have it open. A lot of times when you close the plugin out, you minimize the plugin to get out of the way of the screen, you can't see the plugin anymore. You may be able to see each channel and see what plugins you inserted on each channel or on your buses or your master, but that's it. You can see the plugin, but you have to physically open the window up and then you can see the plugin working. After that, or you can leave the plugin open, but it starts to crowd your screen. Especially even if you had 4 or 5 plugins open, your screen gets crowded really, really quick. And you're like, I gotta move it because I gotta see what's going on with the mixer. That's the downside. The great thing about hardware, the only downside, really the downside to hardware, because who doesn't like hardware? We all like the real thing, but there's cons to hardware. Weight. Most hardware is not mobile. You can't really move hardware around. Hardware can break. Electronics do fail. Hardware can be expensive. And most of the time when you buy hardware, you have to keep buying multiple pieces of hardware. Because you only get one unless you buy more than one hardware. That's the cons to hardware. But overall, there is what we do like about hardware and a real console and actual real gear and real compressors and real reverbs and stuff like that is you can physically touch the knob, you can touch it. Now, even if you have a very small setup where you just had like this controller, your laptop, maybe your audio interface, a couple of mics, maybe a couple of monitors, whatever, you can probably shut everything down and get everything within 5 minutes. Even this setup in here, which is a small setup compared to my main stuff upstairs, this is probably, for me to clear this room out, would probably take me 30 minutes to shut everything down and unplug everything and get everything out of this room. 30 minutes. My setup upstairs, that's a whole day process. It really is. Or at least a half a day. Just undoing all those cables. That's, you ever watch a video of decommissioning a studio? And there's 5-6 people, it's all day process trying to get that console because they got cables in the walls, under the floors, racks of gear. That's just not a moving, that's just not an easy moving process. So that's going to be the downside to hardware. Now, the pros and cons of plugins. The only downside to a plugin is the only thing you're going to miss with a plugin, and it's very, 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 very minute. But will it make the difference in the sonics of that plugin compared to the real unit? It can, but most of the time, will the audience know the difference? Most of the time, no. So if you use a plugin and you're missing the even or odd harmonics in the sonics of the sound because of the natural saturation of the sound, the saturation of the transformers, the tubes, the capacitors, the resistors and diodes, and all that signal going through the circuits of a real unit, will you miss that if the audience doesn't know the difference between a real unit? They don't know what they're listening for. Only professionals do, or people that do this in this business, or people that actually have a trained ear to hear the difference between a real piece of gear and a plug-in. But most people can't even tell the difference in the plug-in because they're modeled well, but your plug-in is only limited to how powerful your PC or Mac is too. But what's the plug-in can be missing? They're always going to be missing a few things. The saturation of the sound going against transformers, because guess what? There's no Mac or PC with discrete op amps and transformers and capacitors in it. All PCs are, it's kind of like, if you really think about it, a real piece of gear that has transformers. I have this old, like even my, amps down here that has op amps and capacitors in the circuit, there's real resistors and capacitors on the circuit board. There's real transformers. There's op amps and all these electronic circuits that affect the sound. You got to remember, like for example, this is an old Mac Pro. This is an old Mac Pro Logic board, the main board. All your sound is being processed by what's going through the RAM. The RAM would be on a separate card in a Mac, but through your RAM and your processor, these dual processors. That's it to what's inside your Mac or your laptop. It's just a logic board with RAM, processor, and everything else is soft. You got hard drives, everything else is software coding. Other than what else you plug into the USB ports or whatever, but whether your audio interface, whatever, your sound card, video card, whatever. But that's it. That's the basis, and you can see here on your logic board, there's no transformers. There's no discrete op amps. There's no all the stuff that makes that real piece of hardware unit, whether it's a compressor, a reverb, a guitar amp, bass amp, keyboards, compressor, delay unit, reverb unit, whatever the case. It's mixing console. There's none of that in your actual motherboard on your computer. It's just the motherboard, RAM, hard drives, and the software that's loaded, the operating system and all your DAW and plugin software. It's all software. So when you get the mindset that, you got nothing but software. Now, does the software do a lot of stuff? Yes, they do amazing stuff with the coding. But that's the thing with, that's the only way you have to look at it. Hardware versus plugins. The factors of the transformers that can affect the sound, you're never going to get transformer sound even in software, because it's the transformers that's making the sound. You can model something to make it sound like it's going against transformers, but it's not going to sound like transformers without actually being transformers, because the transformers themselves in the units is part of the sound. So it's kind of like in the video like this. I try very, very minimum setups. Like I got a very minimum setup in my dining room where I got a MIDI controller like this with my laptop, and I'm using a pair of Logitech speakers with a sub, and I'm just using all the sound in there. Now, does it sound bad? No, not even. It sounds pretty good. I'm using the onboard sound card in the laptop. Now, does it sound like when I come in here and listen to music in here through the console, through the interface, through the racks of gear, through the actual studio monitors, does that in here sound as good as in here? No. This sounds a whole lot better in here if I listen to the same source. It's because of the gear. And then if we go upstairs to my upstairs, it's the same concept. The Allen Heath and the console and all the racks of gear and all that. And then the interface up there, I have a really good sounding interface up there. Just all that makes a difference. So, the end of the video on hardware versus plugins. Plugins always going to have the advantage because of the price. They not necessarily will always have the advantage because of the audio sonics. Will that make a difference? Probably not. Can it make a difference? Probably. If you had a real unit, but most of us, 90% of us can't afford all the wish list gear. Which brings me to my last point of this video. This is the very reason why I only buy, most of my plugins are modeled after all the real gear that would have been in all your top of line studios. The reason why I have like Slate or the IK Multimedia T-Rax or plugins that are emulated after a real piece of gear that looks like a real piece of gear, but it's just a plugin, and they modeled that piece of gear to be like that real piece of gear, is because of the music that I listen to and the music that I make and so forth. All the top-notch studios had the SSL or the Neve or the API consoles with all the LA2A compressors, 1176s, DBX 160s, the distressors or whatever. They all had the MAG EQs or the GML EQs or whatever. They all had all the, the Neve 1073 preamps and so forth. They had all that gear. Well, T-Rax modeled that specifically, like the T-Rax Max or the T-Rax Mix Box or the Slate or Waves or companies that are modeling, and it's because the model plugin is emulating the real piece of gear. So it's going to get you close to the real piece of gear as possible in the plugin form. That's the reason why I go for it. Because every record I listen to, everything from Michael Jackson's Thriller album all the way to Earth, Wind and Fire, to Stevie Wonder, to even Duran Duran or Rat or AC/DC or whatever. I don't care if it's rock, R&B, jazz. They were all recorded in studios like that with SSL consoles or AMEC consoles or CADX or Neotex or Helios or whatever, Harrison, whatever console, MCI. And they all had all that outboard gear. They went through those type of preamps on the console or the outboard preamps. They went through those type of microphones. They went through all that type of outboard gear. Channel Limiteds, whatever the case may be, 2Techs or whatever. They went through that type of gear and they got the results they got that sounded amazing when I listened to all the millions of records that I listened to from thousands of different artists over the last 40 plus years. That's how it was done, and that's why amazing it sounds. So that's why I go for the plugins of that. Not necessarily there's nothing wrong with getting FabFilter plugins as an example that have their own, or there's plugins that look like just a specific software. It's not designed to look like a piece of rack gear, but it's actually just its own plugin. There's nothing wrong with getting plugins like that, especially if you like them and they work. But hardware units, same thing. Like I said, plugins, affordability, but they're only limited to your computer. And here's what's great thing about hardware. The only time you don't have to keep upgrading based on your operating system. The only thing with hardware is you might have to recap something or, whatever the case may be, but you can have a 25-year-old compressor. If it works great, it's worked great. It never needs upgrading like that. There's a version, unless you buy an upgraded hardware unit, like there's a version 2 or version 3 of that hardware unit. But for the most part, you can have I got a Yamaha SPX 90 that probably came around 89, 90. That's about the time frame it was made. Still amazing sounding reverb. I never have to upgrade it because my computer, because my operating system, my computer upgraded. Like if you're running a Mac and you're not, Lion is no longer valuable, you got to use Big Sur now operating system. Well, my hardware unit's always going to be compatible. Plugins and DAWs may not be. So there's pros and cons to all of it. So you have to look at it. If you're like me that don't mind having a hardware unit, I don't care, because how often do you really move your studio? Most people don't move like that. Some people do, but most people don't. So I'm not worried about having heavy gear. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. Hope not. So that's going to do it for the hardware versus plugins. You just have to look at and see what's going to work for you. Honestly, in my last opinion, I like hardware because the real thing, it's kind of like these women on the wall. I consider these women on the wall like plugins. They're nice to look at. I can look at Soleil Lathan or Pebbles or Lisa Ray here or Faith, Mariah Carey, Beyonce, Toni Braxton, whatever the case. But can I actually touch Toni Braxton for real? I can touch the picture. That's what a plug-in like. But if I actually had Toni Braxton sitting on my lap right here, she's the real thing sitting on my lap. That's like me touching this actual real mixer. I can actually touch the mixer. So that's how I look at it. Y'all have a great one.